Let's take some time to laugh at MAGA, as since the Supreme Court was set to weigh in on Trump's sentencing, they've been in my comments stating that the Supreme Court was going to block it and own the libs. And well, now it's came in that even Trump-appointed judge Amy Barrett, who is admittedly one of the good ones, I will say, one of the few things Trump did, despite largely disagreeing with her politics. Obviously, I do think she's a solid judge. And the Republican Judge Roberts, who does not get the same respect from me as he is complete dog shit, but on the right side of history here. So let's jump into this and we can see what context we'll add after.
In just over 13 hours' time, Donald Trump will be sentenced for his 34 felony convictions in New York. That is after the Supreme Court within the last hour or so denied his request for a delay. Now, barely. The 5-4 decision just came down in the last hour. Chief Justice Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett siding with the three liberals on the court, deciding that first, the alleged evidentiary violations at President-elect Trump's state court trial can be addressed in the ordinary course of appeal. That is usually how this works. Second, the burden that sentencing will impose on the president-elect's responsibilities is relatively insubstantial in light of the trial court's stated intent to impose a sentence of unconditional discharge after a brief virtual hearing. Justices Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Alito, who just talked to Donald Trump on the phone yesterday, say they would have granted the stay. Go figure. But with the 5-4 decision, Donald Trump will be the first convicted felon to become president of the United States.
So there you have it. MAGA has officially voted in a convicted and to-be-sentenced felon as our next president. Even the Supreme Court, that heavily leans conservative 6-3 and has multiple Trump hand-picked judges, doesn't agree with this bullshit idea that Trump and MAGA voters are trying to sell, that he should be absolved of all his wrongdoings just because he won an election. Because this wouldn't apply to anyone else, and the president is not king. As sad as that makes MAGA, he too should not be held above the law. And at every level he's tried to appeal this decision, they've all told him there was nothing wrong with the trial. So eat that too, MAGA. He will be sentenced. Honestly, by the time this comes out, we'll probably know his sentence. So comment it below. Let me know what you think about it. Though, as mentioned, it will be with unconditional discharge, which means he won't be spending the jail time. He won't be serving whatever the sentence is, though he will be a convicted and sentenced 34-count felon. For some in MAGA, they thought if he could get out of the sentencing, it wouldn't make him a convicted felon, even though it's not how the judicial system works. But he's also liable for sexual assault fraud and then defamation of the victim he sexually assaulted. So, like, quite the rap sheet there, buddy.
He exhausted his appeals in New York court, right? So that Merchan ordered. Then there's one intermediate appellate level. They said no. Then there's the ultimate appellate level. They said no. Then emergency filing the Supreme Court being like, guys, help me out. You've been there for me all along. Help me out. What was the argument his lawyers were making in the Supreme Court?
His lawyers were making sort of two arguments, Chris. One is that at the trial, there was evidence introduced at the trial on which the jury relied, for which he was entitled to immunity. So his argument goes under the Supreme Court's immunity ruling.
Right. Per John Roberts' SCOTUS opinion last year.
Correct. That not only does the president have immunity from prosecution for his official acts or his core constitutional duties, at least, but he also has immunity from even having official acts evidence introduced in trials having purely to do with his private conduct. That was his first argument. His second argument was, I am a president-elect, and the same constitutional concerns that the Department of Justice recognizes with respect to sitting presidents and prosecuting them for any reason whatsoever, those should apply to me too.
Notice how in none of his arguments that he brought before court did he claim, I didn't do this, or I was wrongfully targeted or prosecuted, because he knows these arguments have no merit and he would get laughed out of court for trying to bring them. This is just what he tells his base. This is just what he tells the cameras, because they're not going to hold them to any standard. They're going to believe anything he says, and it'll then rile them up to ready them for his fascistic actions. So they'll say he's justified in doing them, which is exactly what's happening. Instead, he goes to these different courts and he pleads little meaningless technicalities in hopes that the courts would just bail him out, and then he misrepresents it in front of the media. I mean, this is what he's done his whole life. This is what he did with the Mueller report. This is what he's done with so many things. And now MAGA just doesn't understand what was actually in these reports. And remember now, after being sentenced, how confident MAGA was it would be turned over on appeal. The second he goes to appellate court, it would be turned over, or it'll be blocked by the Supreme Court. They would never let this happen. happened. And I just want to say, it feels great to be affirmed by the courts. Even the conservative Supreme Court wasn't going to fall on this grenade for Trump, as they knew his claims were completely bullshit and that there is no reason he should not face the music, as MAGA would obviously be cheering on any black defendant to do.
I might run for president someday. I think I get immunity, personally. That's my
Well, the DA's
that's my new constitutional interpretation. Let's just keep going with this. You were surprised. You walked in, you're surprised.
Oh, yeah, I got this wrong. I really thought that they were going to bail him out once again, because that's what we've seen. And, you know, some cynicism was warranted. This was 5-4. There were 4 of these justices who were prepared to help him out here. I didn't count on the fact that Justices Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett would do the right thing here. But even then, the order itself is interesting. They say that the reason they're okay with this is because the trial court's stated intent is to impose this sentence of unconditional discharge, which means nothing. No jail, no probation, no conditions, nothing, nada.
Wait, just stop on there right there, because that is a tip to that argument, right? So they're saying, like, the equities that you're bringing forth, which is I am president-elect and I do have many busy things to do, down meetings and calls down in Mar-a-Lago. They're saying, we hear you.
Okay, let's quickly sum up what all has happened here. Trump committed a crime. A state-level DA with no direction from the federal DOJ then compiled the evidence against Trump for this crime. A grand jury of Americans like me and you then found the evidence enough to warrant an indictment. Trump went and had his day in court. During this, Trump was held in contempt over 10 times. I think it was 11 times total. Yet he was never jailed for being held in contempt. For reference, me and you would have been jailed on the first time we were held in contempt, if not definitely the second, if we had like a nice judge. After being able to show his evidence in court, his prosecutor having direct say in jury selection, and deciding on his own recognizance not to testify, a jury of Americans, again, like me and you, found him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, including a jury member who only gets their news from True Social, including 3 or 4 jury members who potentially politically supported Trump. So again, not a biased jury, as they also want to paint it, unanimously decided beyond a reasonable doubt he was guilty on each count of falsifying business records in the first degree. Trump was still, despite this, able to get his sentencing pushed back until after the election, because, you know, it's going to look a lot worse if he gets sentenced before. He then went through the process of appealing this decision on each and every level, bringing it to 3 different levels of appellate court, where each time they found no reason to overturn it, no wrongdoing in the trial, nothing wrong with the evidence. He then went on and asked the Supreme Court, hey, bail me out. You've been there for me with all these other decisions. Bail me out again. They decide to actually take up the case. Again, something they would never do for me or you just because we lost a case on appeal. And then a 6-3 conservative court with 3 justices handpicked by Donald Trump himself found there is no reason to overturn this decision, no reason to block the sentencing. Yet, despite all of this, undoubtedly, Watch MAGA still claim that Trump is receiving unfair treatment, still claim this is all a sham and fake and political targeting of his enemies, despite at every level of the courts, equally partisan appellate courts, a liberal appellate court, and a conservative-leaning appellate court, as well as his hand-picked conservative Supreme Court, all saying, hey, sorry guys, this is completely fair, this is going to go on. Because we're supposed to believe they're all in on it, and that the judicial bias that exists is against rich, straight white men. I'm not even kidding.